The storm had no bottom to it. It came down from the north, the way disasters always do, without announcement, without ceremony. Just a wall of white that swallowed everything behind it and made the world ahead uncertain. The wind did not howl. It was past howling. It pressed against the stone walls of the old garrison like something with intent, like something that wanted in, and the men huddled inside had long since stopped pretending the structure would hold against a second night of this. There were 14 of them. There had been 23 when they left Eastwatch 4 days ago. The ones they'd lost to the whites were gone, the way the dead always take people fast, loud for a moment, then silence. The ones they'd lost to the cold were worse. Those went slowly. A stumble in the white, a voice that grew smaller, and then nothing but the wind filling the space where a man used to be. The garrison itself was barely worthy of the name. 3 walls still standing, the 4th collapsed into a slope of gray rubble that the ice had partially buried. The roof existed over one corner of the structure, and beneath it the survivors had pressed themselves into a mass of shared body heat and damp wool. 2 torches. No fire, the wood was gone. The torches were burning down. Sir Aldrich of the Night's Watch had stopped giving orders an hour ago. He sat with his back against stone and his sword across his knees and his eyes fixed on the gap in the collapsed wall. It was the only direction that mattered now. Everything was coming from that direction. How many? The man next to him, Yoren, a ranger 10 years at the wall, kept his voice flat. It was the voice men used when they'd run out of room for fear and had to settle for information instead. Enough, Aldrich said. That was not an answer. It was the only honest thing left. 3 of the wildlings who had fled south with them were already gone. Not from the cold, not from the weather. The whites had found the forward position an hour before sunset. And what followed was not a battle so much as a demonstration, the kind a wolf gives a dog to establish that there is a difference between them. 2 Night's Watch brothers had died holding the gap. A third had simply vanished, mid-fight pulled backward into the mass of bodies and swallowed before anyone could reach him. We hold until morning, Aldrich said. It was ritual now, not strategy. Yoren said nothing. One of the wildling women, her name was Mira, and she had walked 5 days with a broken rib and never mentioned it, pressed her forehead to her knees and breathed carefully. The torches guttered. Someone was praying in the far corner very quietly to no god that Aldrich recognized. Then the sound changed. It wasn't something you heard so much as something you felt a shift in the quality of the noise outside, the way a room goes quiet when someone important walks in. The whites did not pause in their approach, but something in the blizzard seemed to. A stillness at the center of the white, like a held breath. Yoren stood up. Aldrich stood up. Every person in that corner stood up because the body knows before the mind does when something fundamental has shifted. Through the gap in the ruined wall, past the curtain of driven snow, something moved. It was not a white. Whites moved the way puppets moved, limbs pulled by strings, rhythm without intention. This moved with intention. Singular and deliberate, one step at a time, as if the blizzard were an inconvenience beneath acknowledgement rather than a force of nature. A tall shape, dark at the edges, and red, unmistakably, impossibly red against the white. A long coat, the color of old blood catching the wind, but not surrendering to it. A wide-brimmed hat that the gale could not unseat. The stranger stopped at the edge of the broken wall and stood there, said nothing, and looked at the 14 survivors with an expression that was not quite readable at that distance, but was somehow worse than hostility would have been. It was the look of someone conducting a private assessment in which the people being assessed had no vote. Aldrich had his sword out. He did not remember drawing it. "What is that?" Mira said. not a question. A statement of a reality she was refusing to categorize. The whites were still coming. Aldrich could hear them, the familiar drag and creak of bodies through packed ice, closing from the east and from the north both. Perhaps 30, perhaps more. The torches were almost gone. The stranger looked at the survivors for a long moment. Then he looked past them beyond the standing walls, and Aldrich understood with a cold that had nothing to do with temperature that the creature was not assessing the humans at all. He was watching the whites approach the way a man watches pieces move on a board. Measuring distances, counting angles. He was deciding something, and none of it involved whether they lived. Yoren took a step forward. "Who are you? What?" "Move away from the east wall." The voice carried through the gale without effort, which was its own kind of wrongness. Not loud, not gentle. The tone of something correcting an obstacle. Then, after a pause that felt almost amused, "Unless you'd prefer to die there." "Who are you?" Yoren said again, because men with nothing left but questions asked them twice. No answer came. The stranger had already turned. What happened in the next 3 minutes was something that none of the survivors would describe in the same way twice. Not because their memories failed them, but because the event refused to sit inside the shapes of words they knew. Later, separately, each of them would try. Each would arrive at different details, different fragments, each one catching a different edge of the same dark thing. Mira remembered the silence more than the violence. The strange hollow that formed around the stranger, wherever he moved, the way the whites seemed to hesitate at the edge of it, like animals scenting something older and worse than themselves at the waterhole. She remembered thinking that the creatures were afraid. She had not known until that moment that whites could be afraid of anything. Yoren remembered the ease. Not the brutality he had seen brutality. The watch had shown him plenty. He remembered the ease of it, the total absence of effort. As if the crawling mass of the dead was not a threat to be overcome, but a condition to be corrected, the way a man sweeps beetles from a tabletop before sitting down to eat. Aldrich remembered the White Walker. It emerged from the tree line near the end, when most of the whites were already down. He had not seen it coming. They never announced themselves with sound. They arrived as a conviction, a sudden certainty in the bones that the cold had stopped being weather and become something with will. Its eyes were blue in the way that deep glaciers are blue lit from somewhere inside that had no warmth in it. It moved through the wreckage of its own army, as though nothing that had just happened was relevant to what it intended. The temperature dropped another degree. Aldrich felt it in his teeth. The stranger turned to face it, and then Aldrich heard something he would carry with him for the rest of his life. Not the walker's sound, because those were beyond language, old as the world's first winter. The stranger's sound. Low, brief, almost too quiet to catch beneath the wind. A sound that traveled from the man in red as he looked at the White Walker crossing the blood-dark ground toward him. It was a laugh. Not the laugh of a man who has won something, the laugh of something that has at last found a reason to pay attention. The walker raised its arm. The stranger was already moving. Aldrich blinked. The impact he felt through the soles of his boots was not large. It was contained precise the way the sound of a bone breaking is never as loud as you expect. When he opened his eyes, the walker was gone, and the stranger was standing where it had been, and the remaining whites were collapsing, not fleeing, not retreating, simply stopping like candles going out in sequence across a table. The blizzard continued. That was the most honest part of the night. The weather did not care what had happened beneath it and kept on regardless. When the quiet had held long enough to trust, Aldrich walked out through the eastern gap. The ground was churned and dark in patches that he did not examine. Tracks that had no business stopping simply stopped the way a sentence ends when the person speaking it ceases to exist. The stranger in red was standing at the tree line. still, facing the deeper dark of the forest, not the garrison, not the men behind him. Aldrich stopped 10 feet back. Not from cowardice, he had held the wall for 11 years, had faced things that made experienced men weep. He stopped at 10 feet because something older than his training said that closing the distance was not something you did without being invited. "You saved us," he said. It was the true thing, and true things were all he had left. The stranger did not turn. When he spoke, the voice had the same quality as before, present, without effort, produced by a different mechanism than ordinary lungs and throat. "I did not save you. I was curious. There is a difference." Aldrich stood in the wind and said nothing because there was nothing useful to say to that. When he looked again, the stranger was gone. The tree line stood empty. No trail in the packed snow, no displaced branch, no sign of passage. Whatever had been there had not left it, had simply ceased to be present, which was not the same thing at all. He walked back to the garrison. None of them slept. When gray light finally bled up from the east and the blizzard began to exhaust itself, Aldrich gathered what remained of his people and pointed them south. Mira spoke as they walked quietly to no one in particular. "That was not a man," she said. Jorn did not answer immediately. He kept his eyes on the road ahead, hands loose at his sides, the way he always moved when he was thinking through something that wouldn't resolve. "No," he said at last. "It wasn't. What do we tell them when we reach the wall?" He looked at the gray country ahead, the gray sky, the long miles of nothing between them and any place that could be called safe. "We tell them what we saw. They won't believe it." "Then what's the point? They'll be afraid," Jorn said. "That's close enough." Behind them, the ruined garrison disappeared into white. At the forest's edge, the whites lay in configurations that no mindless corpse would choose by accident, arranged like punctuation at the end of a sentence marking something that had occurred in that place, something the snow was already working to erase. The rumor moved south faster than the survivors did. That was the nature of fear in Westeros. It traveled light, shed its specifics early, and arrived dressed in whatever shape the listener was most prepared to dread. By the time it reached the first settlement past the wall, it had already discarded names and numbers and kept only its weight. Something in red. Walking through the worst storm in years. The dead dropping around it like cut wheat. Not a man, not a walker. Something else. The first man could not stop touching his own hands. He sat across the table from Jon in one of Winterfell's smaller receiving rooms, a ranger named Aldrich Night's Watch. 11 years on the wall, by his own account, and throughout the entire conversation, his fingers kept moving over each other, pressing knuckle to knuckle as if checking that the joints still worked. He was not aware he was doing it. Jon was fairly certain of that. A servant had brought bread and broth when the group arrived. The bread sat untouched. 2 of the survivors had flinched when the kitchen girl set the tray down too quickly, and she had left without being dismissed, moving fast and not looking back. "Start from the garrison," Jon said. Aldrich started from the garrison. His account was organized, delivered in the careful sequence of a man who had rehearsed it enough times to stop flinching at the worst parts. 23 left Eastwatch. 14 reached the ruin. The whites came at dusk. Then the blizzard thickened, and out of it came something that was not a white, and was not a walker, and was not anything Aldrich had a name for. Jon let him finish without interrupting. When Aldrich was done, Jon asked, "The White Walker? You're certain?" "I've seen them before, once at Hardhome. You don't forget." "And this thing killed it." Aldrich's hand stilled for a moment. "Killed isn't the right word. The walker just stopped, like it had been turned off." He stared at the table. The thing in red laughed when it saw the walker coming. Not after, before. Jon absorbed that. He turned it over the way you turn a stone to see what lies under it. What did it look like, the creature? Tall, lean, dressed like no one I've ever seen, long red coat hat with a wide brim. Pale face, dark hair. Could have been a lord from somewhere south if you only saw him at a distance. Aldrich paused. But you wouldn't think that for long. Why not? Because lords are afraid of things. This one wasn't afraid of anything. And I don't mean brave. I mean it was like watching a man regard weather. Like the walker coming at him was weather. Something to be noted and dealt with. He picked up his cup, didn't drink from it. It spoke to us. Said it was curious, that's all, just curious. John held the silence a moment. Then, did it threaten you? No. Did it ask for anything? No. Hassan, did it follow you south? Aldrich's eyes came up. The thought had clearly not occurred to him before this moment, and the fact that it hadn't seemed to unsettle him more than anything else in the conversation. I don't know, he said. I never saw it again after it walked back to the trees. But that doesn't mean... He stopped. Started again. We never heard it arrive either. John thanked him and sent him to the Maester. Then he sat alone with the fire for a while and tried to fit what he'd just heard into the shapes of things he understood. The shapes didn't hold. He had learned at Hardhome that the world was larger and colder than the stories allowed. He had not assumed he was finished learning that lesson. The second account came from Yoren, who had the kind of face that made you trust what came out of it, battered direct, not built for embellishment. He sat down across from John, and before John could speak, Yoren said, I know what you're going to ask, and I know how it sounds. I've been a ranger for a decade, and I know what stories look like when men are frightened and their minds fill in the gaps. This isn't that. Tell me anyway, John said. Yoren told him. His version matched Aldrich's in the parts that mattered and diverged in the smaller details, the way honest accounts always did when the event had been real. He described the creature not in terms of speed or power, but proportion. The scale was wrong, the way a fire that should warm a room instead consumes it. What would you call it? John asked. If you had to. Yoren was quiet for a long time. I wouldn't, he said finally. I've tried since that night. Nothing fits. Whatever it is, it's not from here. Not from beyond the wall. Not from anywhere I know of. He paused. It's something else entirely. Is it dangerous? Everything that can kill is dangerous. You know what I mean. Yoren met his eyes steadily. It walked into a garrison full of terrified men and didn't touch one of them. Whether that's because it chose not to or because we weren't worth the effort, he let the alternative sit there between them like something with its own weight. I wouldn't bet my life on which. Tormund was waiting in the corridor when John came out leaning against the wall with his arms crossed and his red beard tucked into his chest, the posture he adopted when he was deciding between annoyed and alarmed and hadn't landed on either yet. Well, he said, walk with me. They went out into the yard. Gray and dry, the cold, sharp but manageable, nothing like the north. Nothing like what those men had come through. John kept his pace measured, which meant he was working through something. You spoke to the wildlings from that group, John asked. 2 of them. The woman Mira and an older man who wouldn't give his name. Tormund fell into step beside him. You want to know what I think? I want to know what they said. They said the same as the Watchmen, more or less. Which is the part that bothers me. Tormund scratched his jaw. Wildlings and crows agree on almost nothing. These ones agree on every piece that matters. Something in red killed a walker, walked away. When wildlings and crows tell the same story, it's because there's only one story to tell. John stopped walking. They were in the middle of the yard, away from the walls, and the guards on them, away from anyone who might carry words back to the hall. They were rattled, John said. All of them. The watchmen don't rattle easily. No. Yes. Which means whatever's out there scared people who've held their ground against the dead. That's a different kind of problem than the dead. It is, Tormund agreed. The question is whether it's our problem to carry or our problem to step around. We can't step around something we haven't seen. Spoken like a man who's never successfully avoided anything in his life. But there was no humor in it. He studied the wall, the pale sky above it. You want to go look? I want to know what I'm dealing with. You want to go look, Tormund said again, in the flat tone of a man accepting an unwelcome fact about someone he trusts. How many, Tormund? 6. People who've been north and kept their heads. You, me, 4 others, no banners. We find the garrison raid, what's their comeback? And if it's still out there? John's answer didn't come immediately, not evasion, but the particular silence of someone running a calculation that had no clean result. Then we learn what we can, he said. Tormund made a sound that was not quite a laugh. That's either very brave or very stupid. And I've stopped knowing the difference with you. Does it matter? Only to the people who'll have to drag you home. He straightened, rolled his neck. I'll pick the men. Dawn. Before dawn. They rode out in the last dark before sunrise. John and Tormund and 4 men who had been at Hardhome and carried that knowledge in the set of their jaws. No torches. The road north was familiar enough, and light would only announce them. John rode without speaking for the first hour. The country was flat and pale, not peaceful, but emptied as though the land itself had decided not to make claims on anything. The cold sat steady. The horses moved without complaint. Tormund pulled up alongside near the 2nd hour. You're thinking about the walker. I'm thinking about what it means that something killed one. John kept his eyes on the road ahead. They've been pushing south for months. Relentless. One of them appears at a broken garrison in the middle of a blizzard and gets taken apart like it was nothing. He paused. That's not a coincidence. Something out there is engaging them. Or hunting them. Maybe both. Tormund chewed on that. Then, the free folk have stories. Old ones from before the wall was raised. About things that lived in the far north that weren't others and weren't men either. Old monsters older than the others. He paused. Nobody tells those stories anymore. Everyone who remembered them is dead. You think this is one of those? I think the world is older than we know and has more in it than anyone's told us. I've believed that since Hardhome. He glanced sideways. Doesn't mean it's on our side. Nothing out here takes sides. Right. So what matters is whether it's consistent. Consistent things you can work around. He gestured at the pale road ahead. The other kind, you can only survive by accident. John had no answer for that. He filed it with the rest and kept riding. They reached the garrison by mid-morning. What John found there was not what he had expected, which was itself information. He had prepared himself for a battle aftermath, scorched ground, dragon glass residue, the signs of fire or force that the watch had learned to read. The kind of wreckage with a legible cause. This had no legible cause. The whites were arranged. That was the word that arrived and refused to be displaced. They lay at the perimeter of the ruin and in the ground, just beyond it, not fallen randomly, the way bodies fall when the force animating them withdraws. They had been placed or ended at angles that implied some spatial logic John couldn't immediately decode. Not a pattern. The residue of a system. Something had operated here according to rules that simply weren't John's. The Night's Watch brothers who had died were untouched. That was the second thing. They lay where they'd fallen, unmoved, unmutilated, separated from the whites in a way that had not been accidental. Someone sorted them, Tormund said low. John crouched beside one of the downed corpses. Dragon glass dissolution left a specific signature heat from inside a quality of collapse. Wildfire left char and stench. This was neither. The white had simply stopped structure intact, whatever the walkers had seeded in it just gone, withdrawn cleanly as if it had been alone recalled. "Nothing in the watch armory does this," John said. "No." He straightened and crossed to where, according to Aldrich's account, the walker had been. A depression in the ice. 2 feet across, roughly circular edges, too precise to be natural. As if something had pressed the ground down to a single focused point and then lifted away. No tracks leading in, no tracks leading out. In any direction. John stood in the ruin and felt the cold of a place where something had occurred that left no adequate explanation behind it. And for the first time since the interviews, something tightened in his chest that he had to consciously name. Not fear exactly. The particular unease of a man who realizes the tools he's been relying on don't reach far enough. Every measure he had for threat numbers, speed weapon intent had a floor, and what had been here operated below it. One of the men, a scarred crow named Dennis, who had said almost nothing on the ride out, walked to the broken east wall and stood there. After a moment, he said in a voice from which all expression had been carefully removed, "There's something at the tree line." John turned. At the far edge of the clearing where the pines began and the pale winter sky gave way to deeper shadow, something stood. Still. Oriented toward them, red against gray and white. Unmistakable even at this distance. The wide-brimmed hat, the long coat, the quality of stillness that was not the stillness of a man waiting, but of something that had chosen for its own reasons to be seen. Nobody moved. Nobody made a sound. It stood there long enough to be certain, and then longer than certainty required. That was the detail that settled into John's bones and stayed there. It didn't linger because it hadn't noticed them. It lingered because it wanted them to understand that it had decided to linger. The difference between being observed and being permitted to watch. Then it turned unhurried dismissive in the angle of it, the way a man turns from something that has stopped being interesting and walked into the trees without looking back, gone. No displacement of branches. No sound of movement through the undergrowth. Tormund came to stand beside John without speaking. "It knew we were coming," John said. "Probably. It let us see it." "Yes." "And then it turned its back on us." But John kept his voice level, but the thought that went with it was less level, that the turned back was not carelessness. It was a statement about the distance between threat and irrelevance, and which category they occupied. Whatever that is, it doesn't consider us a danger. Tormund said nothing. That was its own kind of answer. John turned back toward the horses. The garrison held its silence around them, its sordid dead and its impossible depression in the ice. "We go back," he said. "What do we tell them?" "We tell them it's real. We tell them it's not the dead, and it's not one of ours, and it killed a walker without breaking pace." He swung up into the saddle. "That should be enough to keep everyone honest about what we're facing." Tormund mounted beside him. "And then what?" John didn't answer immediately. He was already 3 moves ahead because anything less got people killed. "Then we find out what it wants," he said, before it decides to stop waiting for us to ask. The guards on the wall had started doubling up at night. Nobody ordered it. It happened the way things happen in a castle that has absorbed a piece of bad news and not yet decided what to do with it. One man staying past his shift because the dark to the north felt different than it had a week ago. Another joining him because standing alone in that dark had stopped feeling reasonable. John noticed when he came back from the garrison. He noticed the way men in the yard found reasons to face north when they talked. He noticed the Night's Watch survivors had been given a room in the far eastern tower, away from the main hall meals, brought rather than shared at the common table. Sansa had arranged that. She had said nothing to John about it, but the arrangement spoke plainly. These men had touched something the household wasn't ready to be near. He went to see her that evening. "You heard the report," he said, not a question. Sansa stood by the window, a letter in her hand she'd clearly finished reading some time ago and not yet set down. Outside the yard glowed with torches and the specific blue-black of a northern sky without moon. "I heard enough," she said. "You went yourself. I needed to see it." "And did seeing it help?" John thought about the garrison, the arranged dead, the circular depression in the ice, the red shape at the tree line that had turned its back on them, with the dismissiveness of something that had already moved on before it stopped moving. "It confirmed the reports were accurate," he said. "That's not what I asked." She set the letter down. Her voice was not accusing. It was the careful, neutral tone she used when she was being more honest than diplomatic. "You went because you wanted to understand it. And now you understand it less than before." He didn't answer, which was its own kind of answer. "The men are frightened," Sansa said. "Not of the dead. They've been frightened of the dead for months. That fear has a shape of logic. This is different. This is the kind of frightened that doesn't know what shape it is." She set the letter aside. "Whatever is out there, it's already inside Winterfell. Not physically, but it's here." John left her with the window in the dark and went to find Tormund. He didn't sleep. He lay in the dark and ran through what he knew, which wasn't much, and what he suspected, which was worse. The thing had seen his face. More than that, it had chosen to be seen, which meant it understood visibility as a choice and had exercised it deliberately. That was not the behavior of an animal. It was not the behavior of the dead. It was the behavior of something with a long view and the patience required to use it. Near the second hour, a knock came at his door. One of the outriders he'd sent north 2 days prior. A lean, quiet man named Harwin, who had survived 3 ranging missions and knew how to bring bad news without dressing it up. "There's something at the old mill village, my lord. 3 miles north of the outer gate. We found tracks around the perimeter. Not whites." A brief hesitation. "I don't know what made them, but they've been circling the place since yesterday at least." John was dressed before the man finished speaking. "Bahar." The village had been evacuating in stages for weeks. Half its structures already stripped, doors left open to the cold, the particular emptiness of places abandoned in haste rather than choice. John came to its edge in the last hour before dawn. Tormund at his left shoulder, 2 others spread wide behind them. No torches. The pre-dawn sky was the color of iron. He saw the red before anything else, standing at the far end of the main thoroughfare between the collapsed skeleton of a mill and the frozen bank of a narrow stream. Still in the way, it was always still not motionless, but resting with the ease of something that does not need to conserve itself because it has nothing to conserve. Tormund's hand found his axe. John put a hand out without looking at him. They walked forward. The stranger turned when they were 20 paces off. Not startled. No surprise in it at all. He turned the way you turn when something arrives exactly when expected. Up close, closer than the garrison clearing. Closer than any sane distance, the wrongness was quieter than John had anticipated, but more insistent. Not a single obvious feature. The man was tall, pale, dark-haired, dressed in clothing from no culture. John recognized. A long coat the color of old blood, dark layers beneath a wide-brimmed hat, casting shadow across a face that was sharp and entirely too composed for the hour and the cold. John's breath fogged the air between them. Tormund's did. The men behind them did. This one produced nothing. The cold wasn't only the cold. At the edges of the encounter, there was something subtler. The horses 20 paces back had begun to refuse their ground, pulling at their leads with a low, persistent distress, not shying from a sound or a smell. Something older than sound or smell. The stream to their left, half frozen, had gone absolutely still at the section nearest the stranger, as though the water had decided that direction was no longer an option. John filed these things away and kept his face where it was. The eyes, when they fixed on him, were amber and held a quality John had encountered once in the oldest Meister he'd ever known, a man of 90 who had outlived everything he'd cared about and found the process more instructive than distressing. Not warmth. The thing that remains when warmth has been burned away completely, and something else has taken the space. "Lord Snow," the stranger said. John absorbed that it knew his name. He kept his expression level. "You have the advantage of me." "Yes." A beat one breath's worth of deliberate silence. "I often do." Tormund made a sound low in his throat. The stranger's attention moved to him. Cataloged, something returned to John with the efficiency of a man checking inventory. "You've been following the dead," John said. "The dead have been following themselves south. I've been accompanying the process." A tilt of the head, slight and unhurried. "There's a difference." "You killed a White Walker." "I ended a minor inconvenience making noise in my vicinity." Something moved at the edge of his expression, not amusement exactly, but in that district. "The Night's Watch has been fighting those inconveniences for 3 centuries, I understand." "Yes." "I found the disproportion instructive." John took a breath. Cold, clean, carrying the faint iron smell of incoming snow. The village around them held the specific silence of abandoned places, not empty of sound, but emptied of the sounds that mean occupation, that mean anything ongoing. "What are you?" he asked. "Something your world has no category for." Not evasion, the flat precision of a statement of fact. "I'd spare you the attempt to classify me. The effort tends to distress people without informing them." "Where are you from?" "Elsewhere." He said it without irony, without elaboration, and something in the delivery made clear that further questions in that direction would produce the same return indefinitely. John shifted. "What do you want?" The stranger was still for a moment, not uncertain, but selecting. "To see how this ends," he said at last. "The war. All of it." His attention moved briefly north past John toward the dark beyond the tree line. "I've observed many wars. Most are tedious attrition, desperation, the side that endures longest wins, or everyone loses together and the landscape forgets them both." He came back to John. "This one has more variables than usual." "The dead are one variable." "Yes." "And us." "Yes." "And you." The stranger looked at him then with something more specific in it. Actual attention weighted the kind that costs something to give. "You died," he said. "Not a question." John's jaw set. "I lived," Both. No challenge. A statement of something observed and against reasonable expectation found interesting. Most things that die remain dead. The ones that don't are either very powerful or very stubborn. His head tilted a fraction. You don't strike me as particularly powerful. I'm not sure that's a compliment. It isn't. Stubborn things are often the ones that make the most noise while dying. A fractional pause, not the word, but the implication behind it deliberate and cool. And I've listened to a great many things die. Though occasionally stubbornness is the only variable that matters. I haven't decided which applies to you. The honesty of it, if it was honesty, if the word reached, was harder to sit with than contempt would have been. Tormund stepped forward. He'd been holding it back for some time, and it showed. What do you want with Winterfell? Speak plainly or don't speak. The stranger's attention moved to him. Something in it that was almost appreciative, the way a man looks at a blade that turns out to be well balanced. Your companion is more direct than you are, Lord Snow. Then answer him, Jon said. I want nothing from Winterfell. I want nothing from either of you. The voice stayed even. What I want is to watch the ending arrive. Whether you survive it is a separate question, and one I have no investment in. What interests me is the quality of what you attempt before the end comes. You've been clearing whites, Jon said. That helps us survive. I've been clearing whites because they crowd my path and they're dull. If their removal happened to benefit you, that's coincidence. Don't mistake coincidence for alliance. And the walker. Something real moved through the stranger's expression, then not pleasure, something more interior, a genuine register that had no performance in it. The walker, he said, was the first thing in this country that gave me a reason to remain rather than move on. He let that sit for a moment before continuing. I killed it because things that believe themselves unkillable deserve to be corrected on that point, and because it was the first 3 seconds in a considerable span of years that required my full attention. Something in his tone shifted very slightly toward the edge of something that had once been satisfaction. I had forgotten what that felt like. The admission was more unsettling than a threat would have been. Jon glanced at Tormund. Tormund's expression said, I understand none of this, and I would very much like to leave, and I am also not going to be the first one to move. Jon looked back. The dead are coming south. Thousands of them. More walkers behind them. What remains after your corrections will still hit Winterfell. Yes. Will you be there when that happens? The amber eyes held something Jon had no name for. Not promise, not refusal. Something still in the process of deciding itself. That depends, the stranger said, on whether the ending retains anything worth watching. It was not the answer Jon had wanted. It was a more honest answer than most people offered him. He took one step forward, not closing on the creature, but coming parallel to it, to the stream bank, close enough now that the absence of breath fog was impossible to ignore. Close enough to see the coat in detail and to feel the wrongness of it up close. Not cold emanating from him. Not heat, simply a quality of presence that did not behave the way presence should. I'm not asking you to fight for us, Jon said. I'm asking you not to fight against us. Those are very different things. I know. The stranger considered him. Whatever moved behind those eyes operated on a register Jon couldn't access, not concealed, just constituted differently, running on a logic that didn't overlap with anything he'd been trained to read. Lord Snow. The voice was patient in the way old things are patient. Not kind, not generous, just accustomed to time. You're asking me to make a commitment about my behavior to someone I have no obligation toward. You have no leverage, no offer that would hold my interest. No mechanism to compel me in any direction. A beat. And yet you ask directly, without pretense, without trying to make it sound like less than what it is. Most men in my position have better options, John said. I don't. The stranger held his attention for a moment longer. Then, not quite a smile, but the shadow of something that had once known how to be one, he turned away. I'll be watching, he said, not to John, not to Tormund, to the dark and the coming snow, and whatever waited out there that he had already determined was worth his time. He walked into the shadow between the mill and the frozen stream. The shadow kept him. And Tormund exhaled, a significant amount of visible breath. It seemed to help. Well, he said. John didn't answer. It knows your name. Yes. It knows you died. Yes. It said the dead bore it. Tormund scratched his beard, the sound very loud, in the stillness that had settled over the village. We've spent 3 years with people dying over those creatures. I know. What in all the frozen hells is that thing? I don't know, John said. He turned back toward Winterfell, toward the torches on the wall, already sorting through what had just happened, separating what was useful from what was merely alarming. The second category was still larger than he wanted. Did you believe it? Tormund asked, moving alongside him. That it wants nothing from us. John thought about the amber attention, the quality of it genuine appraising, carrying none of the ordinary self-interest that human attention always carries underneath. The admission about the walker, the response to the request. I believe it doesn't want our cooperation, he said. I believe it's entirely capable of watching every person in Winterfell die if the dying doesn't interest it sufficiently. He kept walking. I also believe it'll be there when the dead arrive. That's what it came here for. And if it decides to work against us instead, then we die faster and less usefully. John's tone didn't change. But it won't. The dead bore it. The walkers interested. We're somewhere in between, neither boring enough to ignore nor interesting enough to end. That's a comfortable margin to be operating in, Tormund said flatly. It's the only margin we have. They walked in silence for a while. The torches on the wall grew closer. The sky behind them had begun to pale at its eastern edge, gray light seeping up from below the horizon. They came through the outer gate as the first shift change happened on the wall. Men coming down, men going up the morning shuffle that had happened every day in this castle for 300 years. But 2 of the guards coming off duty stopped when they saw John, not blocking his path, just stopped and watched him cross the yard and said nothing to each other. He felt it without needing to look. The word had moved faster than he had. What do we tell them? Tormund asked. John looked at the yard. The guards, the servants already beginning their morning work, the castle finding its rhythm for another day. All of it normal on the surface. All of it running on a current that had changed. We tell them it's real, he said. Not the dead. Not our enemy. He paused 1 beat at the door. Yet, Tormund said nothing. Neither of them moved to take the word back. The first sign was the bread. Sansa noticed it 2 days after John returned from the village. The kitchen had begun baking earlier than usual, before full light, the fires going while the yard was still dark. She asked the head cook about it. The woman who had served Winterfell for 20 years and been unflappable through sieges and occupation, and worse, said only that the staff felt better keeping busy. Then she looked at the floor and said nothing else. Sansa understood. The bread was not about bread. She spent that morning moving through the castle at a pace slow enough to observe. The stable boys had shifted the horses away from the northern stalls. Without being asked, the animals had become difficult there, restless in the nights since the outriders' report. 3 linen maids had taken to working in pairs when they crossed the yard after dark. The night guards on the northern wall had stopped facing inward during their watch. All of them oriented outward now toward the tree line, toward the long dark beyond the gate. Nobody was talking about it directly. That was the part that concerned her most. When people talked about fear, the fear had edges and could be examined. When they stopped talking and started rearranging their behavior in small wordless ways, the fear had already moved past language into instinct. She found John in the war room. He was studying the maps of the northern approaches. Not for the first time, she could tell by the way the parchment was worn, at certain corners, handled repeatedly in the same spots. Davos sat across from him, his weathered hands wrapped around a cup he hadn't drunk from. Tormund was near the window, which was where Tormund always stationed himself when he was trying to decide whether to be in a conversation. "How long has he been circling the perimeter?" Sansa asked. John looked up. 2 days of confirmed sightings. The outriders think longer. Confirmed sightings. By the Northern Guard. She kept her voice even. The same guard that doubled itself without orders and can't be convinced to look away from the forest, even during meals. Their fear doesn't make the sightings wrong, Davos said gently. Their fear makes every sighting larger than it is. She came to the table and studied the map, the line of the northern approaches the forest, the distance between the tree line and the outer wall. Not far enough. It was never far enough. It was seen at the eastern gate last night. Not inside. Near it. John was quiet. "Tormund," she said. He turned from the window wearing the expression of a man who respects a question he doesn't want to answer. "One of my people saw it at the old mill 2 nights ago, standing on the roof, facing the wall." "Facing the wall," Sansa repeated. "Not the forest, not north, the wall." "Yes." Sansa fixed on John. John's eyes dropped to the map. The old argument texture settled between them, not one they'd had yet, but one they'd both known was due. "You spoke with it," she said. "Yes. And it told you it wants nothing from Winterfell." Those were its words. "And you believed it." "I believed it wasn't lying," John said. "That's not the same as believing it's harmless." He finally raised his head. "Sansa, it has been here for weeks. It's had every opportunity to do damage and hasn't. It killed a White Walker. Cleared a path through whites that our own forces couldn't have managed without heavy losses. I know what it's done." Her tone was precise, each word placed with care. "I also know that things which are useful and uncontrollable are the most dangerous kind of thing there is. The useful part makes you lower your guard. The uncontrollable part is what kills you when you've lowered it too far." "She's right," Davos said in the voice he used when he thought both sides were right and wished they weren't. "I've known men like that. Good fighters, useful in a battle. Impossible to trust past the fight because they operated by their own logic. Eventually, the logic diverged." "This isn't a man," Tormund said. "No. Which makes the logic more divergent, not less." John pressed his hands flat on the table. "We're facing the largest army of the dead in living memory. We don't have the numbers to hold Winterfell by conventional means. Burning and dragon glass only go so far when the enemy doesn't stop moving." He met her eyes directly. "I'm not saying trust it. I'm saying that removing something currently killing our enemies on the basis that it might become a problem later is a risk I can't justify right now." "You're saying leave it alone." "I'm saying leave it alone. And if it decides to test what alone means by walking through the gate?" John held her gaze. He didn't have an answer for that, and they both knew it. "Set a watch on every approach," she said. "Not just the north, every gate, every section of the outer perimeter. I want word the moment it moves closer than half a mile." She straightened. "And I want the chain of command clear on what the watch is not to do. No provocation, no attempts, nothing that gives it reason to decide we're worth engaging." She turned to Tormund. "Your people know how to watch without being watched in return." "Some of them," he said. "The ones who've been beyond the wall long enough. Use those ones." She left the war room before Jon could offer reassurance she didn't want. The corridors of Winterfell were her country. She knew their sounds and their hush, and the hush currently occupying the castle was not the disciplined kind, not the ordinary kind. It was the held breath of a house that had received news it hadn't finished digesting. She found Bran in the glass garden, which he often preferred in winter, for reasons that had nothing to do with warmth and everything to do with the quality of light. Not looking at the plants, facing north through the glass panes which gave a distorted view of the sky above the outer wall, pale gray low clouds that heavy uniform cast. Of a day building towards snow and withholding it, Sansa came to stand beside him. In the months since his return, she had learned that the most useful way to speak with him was directly. Preamble confused the signal. "What do you know about what's outside the walls?" she asked. Bran was quiet for a moment, in the way that meant he was coming back from somewhere rather than searching for words. When he spoke, his voice had the quality it always had, now present, but detached like a man reporting from a distance. "It's old, he said. "Older than anything in the memory I have access to. Older than the wall. Older than the others." Sansa kept her breathing steady. "Is it a threat to us?" "Everything capable of ending you is a threat." He paused. "Whether it intends to is a different question." "Does it intend to?" Another silence longer. "It hasn't decided," Bran said. "It's watching. That's what it came here to do, to watch." His eyes had not moved from the glass and the pale sky behind it. "The thing that concerns me isn't its intent toward us." "Then what concerns you?" "It's being watched in return." He said it the way he said most things, without alarm, without urgency, as a plain statement of something observed. Not by us. By something else. Something that has noticed it, the way you notice a fire in a room that should have no fire. Sansa waited, but nothing more came. That was the difficulty with Bran. He gave you the weight without the purchase, a fact with no handle to grip. "Is that good or bad for us?" she asked. Bran finally turned his head, and his eyes settled on her with an expression that was not unkind, but carried the specific sadness of someone who has seen too many endings to assign simple values to their components. "I don't think that framing helps," he said. She left him to the glass and the gray sky. So Arya found her in the armory late that afternoon, not by accident. Arya rarely found anyone by accident. She was examining a crossbow with the focused attention she gave most objects, turning it in her hands, checking the draw weight without loading it. She didn't look up when Sansa entered. "You've been running the circuit," Arya said. "The household needed managing." "You were checking on people's fear?" She set the crossbow down. "Seeing how far it had spread?" Her eyes came to Sansa then. "It's gone all the way to the kitchen, probably further. I'd say the eastern stable by now." "I know." "Does Jon know?" "Jon knows. Jon's approach to managing it is to remind everyone that it hasn't attacked us." She kept her voice neutral. "He's not wrong. He's also not right," Arya said. "Something doesn't have to attack you for it to be a problem. It just has to be in the space between you and every decision you make." She leaned against the wall, arms crossed, wearing the coiled stillness that had always been hers, not relaxed, but conserved. I watched it from the battlements last night. Sansa stilled. How long was it visible? Long enough. It was at the edge of the tree line, which is well within arrow range. Arya's voice carried no drama. It wasn't assessing the wall for weaknesses. It was studying the people on it. Specifically, at me, for maybe 20 seconds. She met Sansa's eyes. It tilted its head, like I was something slightly more interesting than the rest of the wall. A pause unadorned. Then it was gone. No movement I could track. Just gone. Sansa absorbed this. What do you make of it? I make of it that normal caution doesn't apply. Arya's tone was careful and precise, not frightened, which was more unsettling than if she had been. I've trained to move through spaces without being tracked. I know the difference between something watching and something seeing you. That thing was seeing me. She picked up the crossbow again. If it wanted to come over the wall, the guard would never know until it was already inside. Then, the guard is decorative. The guard keeps honest people honest and scared people scared. It's not useless. But against that thing, if it chose to act, Arya set the crossbow back with a quiet, definitive sound. No, the guard doesn't change the outcome. Sansa had known this already. Hearing it from Arya made it a different kind of known. Is there anything that does? She asked. Arya was quiet for a moment. The armory held its smell of iron and oil and old leather around them. Maybe, she said, but not a plan I'd want to execute from weakness. She turned to Sansa. The worst thing we could do is try something and fail. Failing teaches it how seriously we want it gone and what we're capable of doing about it. After that, every interaction we have would be from a worse position. So we do nothing. We do nothing stupid. A distinction clear and distinct. There's a difference. And the snow came that evening light and early, the first real fall of the deep season, rather than the scattered flurries that had preceded it. It softened the yard and settled on the wall and made the world outside the gate quieter than it had been. One of the northern guards came to find Sansa as she finished the evening's correspondence. His name was Pell, a steady man, who had been on the northern watch since before the long night rumors had sharpened into certainty. He stood at her door with the expression of someone who had decided honesty was more useful than comfort. "My lady," he said, "you asked to be told if there was movement." She set down her quill. "Where?" "East Gate, about 100 yards out, standing in the snowfall." He paused. Not moving, just standing. Sansa rose and went to the window that faced east. Too far and too dark to see anything but the wall and the white field beyond it and the shapes of trees further back. She stood there for a moment, and then she took a torch from its bracket and walked up to the eastern battlements herself. She saw it immediately, 100 yards, closer than it had been at the tree line. The red was visible even through the falling snow, which was settling on everything else on the wall, on the ground, on the branches of distant pines, and not apparently on the coat or the hat or the unmoving shape beneath them. It stood with the stillness of something that had arrived at a considered distance and stopped there deliberately. It was facing the wall, not sweeping the gate for weakness, not moving along the perimeter, facing the wall. Facing her, she understood, because she was the only person standing on the battlements, and she had brought a torch, and they both knew it. The wind moved the snowfall between them, the distance between 100 yards. And whatever this thing was capable of crossing in any given moment was a number Sansa could not calculate with any confidence. She did not retreat. She stood with the torch and held the distance because the alternative to turn away first to let it see her go was a concession she was unwilling to make. Whatever this thing was, it was going to understand that the person managing Winterfell was not the kind of person who backed away from windows. They held that distance for nearly a minute. Then it turned unhurried as it always was and walked north, and the snowfall closed behind it, and the field was empty again. Sansa stayed on the battlements for another long moment after it had gone. The snow settled on her shoulders and on the torch and on the cold stone of the wall beneath her hands. Bran's words stayed with her, that it hadn't decided, that it was watching, that something else had noticed it in the way you notice a fire in a room that should have no fire. Arya's word too for the space between them and every decision they made. And the thing itself had walked to 100 yards from her gate, stood in the snowfall, and waited to be seen. The only interpretation that accounted for all of that, every piece of it, was that it was communicating something, not a threat, not yet. An introduction of terms. She was still thinking about those terms when she came back inside and found Jon waiting at the foot of the stairs. He read her face and said nothing. "It came to the eastern approach," she said. 100 yards. Stood in the open. "I know. Pell told me. It was watching me specifically." She kept walking because standing still felt like the wrong thing. "I stayed. I know that too." A beat. "Was that wise?" She glanced at him. "Was your conversation at the village wise?" He had no answer for that which was the point. "Jon." She stopped. "I'm not going to pretend we have a good option here. I know we don't. But whatever this is, it is making deliberate choices about how it presents itself to us. That means it's capable of deliberate choices." She faced him squarely, "which means at some point something will prompt it to make a choice we won't like. And I want to be very sure that when that happens, it isn't something we did." Jon held her gaze. "Agreed," he said. It was not comfort. It was not resolution. It was the only honest thing available, which in Winterfell was usually enough. The patrol came back wrong. Not injured, not reduced in number. Wrong in the way that has nothing to do with wounds. 6 men who had left at dusk. Moving and talking in the manner of men who have been through something together, and who returned before midnight in a formation that was too tight, too quiet. Eyes tracking the ground rather than each other. Sansa was in the great hall when they came through the inner gate. She watched them from the upper gallery, keeping back from the rail. The lead man, a free folk fighter named Cotter, who had made the ranging beyond the wall 3 times and come back each time wearing the experience, lightly walked to the nearest wall, put his back against the stone, and stayed there. She went down. "What happened?" she asked him. Cotter took a moment. Not collecting himself, the man was collected, deciding what to say. "We found him on the North Road," he said. "About 2 miles out. Standing in the middle of the path. Doing what? Nothing." He met her eyes. "That was the thing, my lady. Nothing. Just standing there, in the road. Like he'd been there a while and was prepared to be there longer." A pause. "We stopped. He didn't move, didn't speak. We waited. He waited." Cotter's jaw shifted. Martin tried to go around him through the tree line and came out 20 yards further up the road. Said he didn't hear anything move, nothing at all. But when he looked back, the thing was facing him. Not us. Him. It had tracked through the trees in complete silence. Sansa kept her expression even. "Did anyone engage?" "No." Something flickered in his face, not shame, but the cousin of it. "We came back." She held his gaze for a moment. You made the right call. He didn't look like he believed that. She didn't entirely believe it either, but it was the right thing to say, and saying it was part of her job. She found John before dawn. He was where he usually was when he couldn't sleep at the window of the upper study, standing with his arms crossed and his eyes on the dark northern tree line. He didn't turn when she came in. He had heard her step in the corridor. Cotter's patrol, he said. You know? Harwin told me an hour ago. He turned then. He looked like a man who had been running calculations all night and had not liked any of the results. It stood in the road and tracked one of them through the trees without being heard. Yes. John. She came to stand across from him, the map table between them. It's not staying at the tree line anymore. It's moving into the approaches. It didn't attack them. It didn't need to. Her voice stayed level. Do you understand what it cost us for that patrol to turn around? Not strategically, humanly. Those are experienced men. Cotter has been beyond the wall. He put his back against a wall when he came inside. She let that land. It doesn't have to attack us to damage us. It's doing it already. John said nothing for a stretch. Outside, the sky was just beginning to separate from the darkness below it, that first gray differentiation before true dawn. I know, he said. Then what is your answer? I don't have one yet. You need one, not an accusation. A fact stated as plainly as she could manage. Because the people in this castle are going to find their own answer if you don't provide one first, and I don't think you'll like what they choose. John looked at her. What do you mean? She crossed to the door, opened it, and said 2 names to the guard in the corridor. Then she came back and waited. They gathered in the small war room just after first light. John, Sansa, Davos, Tormund, and 2 others Sansa had asked for, specifically Lord Roderick Castle's younger cousin Aldrich, who commanded the garrison's mounted archers, and a free folk woman named Aegrin, who had been among the survivors brought south after the garrison fell, and who had in the days since become an informal spokesman for the free folk fighters in the castle. Arya came without being invited, which Sansa had also expected. She stood near the back wall and didn't sit, which meant she had decided to observe rather than participate, which meant she was already ahead of the conversation. The situation has changed, Sansa said without preamble. 2 nights ago, it was at the eastern approach. Last night, it was 2 miles up the north road, blocking a patrol. It is moving closer on its own schedule, and no one in this room has the means to prevent that. We don't know it's moving with intent, Davos said carefully. We know it chose to stand in the middle of a road where a patrol would encounter it, and then track one of them through the trees without being heard. Sansa held his gaze. That's a choice. Intent follows from choice. It still didn't attack, John began. We're past that, Sansa said. John, we are past the question of whether it has attacked us. The question now is what we do while we still have something resembling a choice in the matter. The room absorbed that. Aldrich, who had been quiet up to this point, spoke with the deliberateness of a man reporting something he wished he didn't know. With respect, my lady, my lord, there are men in this garrison who are not going to wait much longer for an answer. Castle's men. 3 of the northern lads who came south with the Night's Watch survivors. He held John's gaze, not apologetic, not defiant, somewhere between the 2. They've been talking. About what? John asked. About whether waiting is the same as choosing to die slowly. The words settled in the room like something dropped from a height. Nobody moved to retrieve them. Tormund crossed his arms. What do they think they'd do? The thing walked through a White Walker like it was practice. They know that, Aldrich said. They're talking about dragon glass, fire traps, numbers. He paused. They're not stupid. They just think that doing something is better than doing nothing. And fear has a way of making that logic feel sounder than it is. It's not sound at all, John said flatly. If they move against it and fail, and they would fail, we've announced to something that can rip through whites barehanded, that we've decided to treat it as an enemy. Whatever neutrality it's been maintaining ends the moment we throw the first arrow. John is right, Arya said from the back of the room. Everyone turned to her. She hadn't moved. Those men would die, she continued in the tone she used for things that were simply true. And they'd die having accomplished nothing except teaching it that Winterfell is willing to act against it. After that, we'd have a real problem. She let one beat pass. Not the problem we have now, a real one. Then what do you suggest? Aldrich asked. I suggest, Arya said, that no one does anything until we understand what it actually is. Her eyes moved to John. Because right now, everyone in this room is making decisions based on what it looks like it might do. We don't know its limits. We don't know what holds it. We don't know if it sleeps, if it plans, or if it's testing us on purpose or wandering because it finds us mildly interesting. She let that sit. Throwing dragonglass at something you don't understand is how you find out you were wrong in the worst possible way. Sansa had expected Arya to be the blade in this conversation. She had not expected her to cut in Jon's direction. The room held still. What I want, Sansa said, is for both of those things to be true at once. For us to maintain the order that keeps our own people from doing something catastrophic, and for someone to find out what we're actually dealing with before the wrong person makes the wrong decision. She faced Jon directly. Can you give me that? Jon was still for a moment, not hesitating, absorbing what the answer would cost him. I can give you the order, he said. No one moves against it without my command. Anyone who does will answer for it. He glanced at Aldrich. Make sure Castle's men understand that. Aldrich nodded. He had the face of a man who would deliver the message and doubted it would hold. Jon knew it too. The knowledge sat on him plainly. Not defeat, but the weight of a man who has issued a command he cannot fully enforce, and has done it anyway because the alternative was worse. He said nothing more about it, which was its own kind of statement. The second part, he continued, is harder. It's always harder, Sansa said. Bran was in the courtyard when the meeting ended in the open air. Despite the cold, which he sometimes preferred for reasons that remained opaque to everyone but him. Sansa stopped beside his chair. She had learned not to open with questions. He answered the thing underneath the question more often than the question itself, which could be useful or could be deeply unhelpful depending on what you needed. It blocked a patrol last night, she said, stating it instead of asking. Yes. He was facing east, not north for once. Is it testing us? A long beat. It's not thinking about us specifically, Bran said. That's not quite the right frame. His voice had the quality of someone describing something at a remove through layers. It's thinking about the shape of the thing that's coming. We are part of the shape, but not the focus of it. That's not comforting. No. He turned his head slightly. Not enough to look at her directly, but enough to indicate he was aware of her. The men who are thinking about moving against it, he said. They won't stop because they were told to. Sansa stilled. Are you certain of that? He didn't answer. That was answer enough. Arya found her in the corridor outside the armory just before the second evening bell. She fell into step without announcement. They walked together for a moment, two women who had learned to move through this castle as children and had been remade by everything since. You knew what I was going to say in there, Arya said. I suspected. You still wanted me in the room. Yes, because Jon listens to you differently than he listens to me. Sansa kept her pace. We arrive at the same place from opposite directions. That's useful. Arya was quiet for a moment. The men, Aldrich mentioned. Yes. I've been watching them. No drama in it, no emphasis, just a report. 3 of them, specifically Harwick, the 2 Kessel cousins. They've been meeting after the second watch rotation in the granary storage, not the barracks. She glanced at Sansa. People who are just venting fear meet in the barracks. People who are planning something meet somewhere they can't easily be overheard. Sansa absorbed this. How long? Since 2 days after the Eastern Approach sighting. Arya paused. They've been gathering things. I haven't been close enough to inventory, but I could see they were carrying something out of the south stores last night. It wasn't food. The corridor held only the sound of their steps, torches in their brackets stone keeping the cold in the walls. Winterfell going about its evening in all the ways it always had. If Jon's order doesn't hold them, Sansa said, and they try, they'll die. Arya said it flat, no color in it. Not cruel plain. And then we'll have whatever comes after they die, which is worse. Can you stop them? Jon doesn't need to know. Arya's walk didn't change. Her face didn't change. What do you mean by stop? Slow them down long enough for this to resolve some other way. Not. Sansa kept her voice low. Not anything permanent. I don't want blood in this castle that I put there. Slowing them down, Arya said, weighing it, would mean making them believe their plan is already known, or making their preparations disappear. Yes, a beat. I can do that. Sansa didn't say thank you. Arya wouldn't have wanted it. They reached the junction where the corridors split north and east and separated Arya toward the yard. Sansa toward the upper hall, each at the pace of someone with too much remaining to do. She did not sleep again that night. She was at the desk when the knock came near the 3rd hour of darkness. Not Pell this time, but one of the younger guards, a boy named Hune, who had the look of someone delivering news he'd been frightened to carry. My lady, he swallowed. The north gate, the outer latch. She waited. It was open, he said. We locked it at the 2nd bell. It was open at the 3rd. No damage, no marks. The crossbar was removed from inside and set against the wall. Us, he met her eyes. Very careful like. Not broken. Just moved. Sansa was quiet for a long moment. Was anything missing, anyone? No, my lady. Nothing disturbed on our side. Just the gate had been opened. He paused, then closed again. She thanked him and sent him out. The boy's footsteps faded. She stayed at the desk. No damage, no marks. The crossbar set against the wall like a thing left tidily aside. That last detail was the part she kept returning to, not the opening of the gate, which was alarming enough, but the care of it. The crossbar hadn't been snapped or thrown. It had been placed. The way you place something when you want whoever finds it to understand that you could have done much worse and chose not to. Not a demonstration of force, a demonstration of restraint, which was, she understood, considerably more frightening. Nobody said his name aloud when the guard had reported it. Nobody would. Not a threat. Not yet. She was already running through the granary. Dragonglass counted in the dark. 3 soldiers who were going to conclude that fear was more rational than patience, that dying trying was better than dying, waiting, and who would be wrong about both things and do it anyway. Even if Arya emptied their stores and she would men who had decided to act didn't stop for missing equipment, they adapted. They found other routes, other materials, other moments. She knew this the way she knew most things about fear, from watching it operate in people over time, in rooms she hadn't been invited to. At some point, the candle burned low enough that the quality of dark around her shifted. And in the hall below the castle, made the small sounds of a household that would wake soon and discover it had come through another night. And she began drafting the order. Not the order John had given the public one, the visible one, but the other. The one that ran below the official record. The one that kept a castle functioning when the person commanding it openly could not afford to see everything that needed doing. In the granary, 3 men slept beside what they'd gathered. They would find it gone in the morning. They wouldn't know how long they'd been observed or by whom. They would know from the absence of their preparations that someone did know, and that knowledge would make them careful in the short term and more dangerous in the longer one. They wouldn't stop. Arya hadn't promised they would stop. She had promised to slow them. It was, Sansa thought, the most honest promise available. The gate that had been opened and closed with such deliberate courtesy would remain for now. The thing that no one at a certain level discussed. It sat in the dark outside the walls, like a message sent in a language they hadn't quite learned yet, patient, faintly amused, waiting to see how long it would take them to understand what had been said. Harwick told himself it was the right call 3 times on the walk out. Once, when they passed the outer gate, which the guard on duty pretended not to see them go through, and that pretending was its own kind of permission. Once, when Aldrich's cousin Bram checked the fire oil and said nothing, which meant he'd stopped arguing against it. And once when the tree line swallowed them, and the castle disappeared behind the snow-heavy pines, and there was nothing left to turn back toward that wouldn't mean confessing to a decision they hadn't quite admitted making yet. They were 6. They had been 8 the night before, but 2 had pulled out in the hours between planning and doing. And Harwick had decided not to count that as a sign. People got cold feet. The 2 who stayed were the 2 who mattered. Bram with the fire oil and the prepared ground. Seward, who had put an arrow through a white skull at 200 yards last month and hadn't missed since. The plan was sound. Harwick believed that with the conviction of a man who has built a strategy to fit his nerve rather than the other way around, but it was still sound. They had chosen the culvert road, a natural channel between 2 rises in the ground heavily wooded on both sides terrain that forced anything moving along it into a corridor no wider than 4 men abreast. They had soaked the fallen timber at the narrows with oil 3 hours before. Dragon glass tips on every bolt, Seward's knock already set. Jon Snow said, one of the younger ones began. Jon Snow said a lot of things. Bram said, and that was the end of it. They reached the narrows, just past the 2nd hour before dawn. Harwick took up position on the eastern rise, behind a deadfall that gave him cover and line of sight the full length of the culvert. The others spread along the high ground, Seward at the far end where anything that made it through the narrows would have to pass. They waited. The cold had reached the point where it stopped being felt past sensation into simple fact like elevation or darkness. The trees made no sound. Snow had been falling when they left, but it had stopped and the world was very still. Harwick thought, if it doesn't come tonight, we come back tomorrow. We come back as many nights as it takes. He thought we're the ones who'll be inside the walls when it decides to stop watching. He thought at least this is a choice we made ourselves. Then it came. He almost missed it. That was the worst part to admit later, that it didn't approach from the north the way they'd expected, the way everything that came from beyond the wall approached, and that the first indication wasn't a sound or a shape, but a change in how the cold felt. Not colder. Different. the way iron feels different from stone, even at the same temperature. It walked out of the western tree line, not the northern end of the culvert, not the approach they'd funneled toward, and came to a stop at the edge of the firelight from Bram's pre-laid torches with the ease of a man arriving somewhere he had already been several times in his mind. The red coat was dark in the torchlight. The hat cast the face in shadow. It stood there. For a moment, nothing moved. Nothing. Harwick made the signal anyway, because the plan was the plan, and the plan was all they had, and Seward put 3 dragon glass bolts into its chest inside 2 seconds with the precision of a man who genuinely could not miss. The thing staggered. 1 step back. The bolts were in it visibly, in it the shafts jutting from the coat, and Harwick heard someone on the rise exhale in a way that was almost hope. "Light it," he said. Bram released the torches. The oil-soaked timber at the narrows caught with a sound like a drawn breath, and the firelight jumped. The culvert between them filled with orange and heat, and for 3 full seconds, Harwick let himself believe that something had gone right. The shape in the fire didn't move. It stood in the burning timber. The coat was burning. It stood in that, with the ease of something that has never been required to flee from anything. And then it turned its head slowly, almost politely, in the direction of Seward at the far end of the culvert. Seward fired again. The bolt stopped. Not deflected, not missed. It stopped midair 4 inches from the brim of the hat and dropped into the snow. The figure reached up and removed the remaining shafts from its chest, not hurried, not pained with the same interest a man might take in removing a splinter. It held them for a moment. Then it set them down in the snow at its feet, upright, like a small offering. Someone on the rise was saying something that had stopped being words. The fire was still burning. It stepped out of the fire. The coat was still burning in patches, the red darker where the oil had caught, and it was walking now toward the eastern rise with no urgency at all. And that unhurried pace was the thing that dissolved the last of them. 3 broke from the high ground immediately. Harwick stayed because his legs had decided the question for him, and because he could hear Bram, somewhere to his left, making sounds that a man makes when something has gone very wrong, very quickly with his understanding of the world. "Run," Harwick said. He said it to himself mostly. He didn't. What happened in the next 2 minutes, Harwick would never be able to recount in order. Not because he was unconscious, but because the sequence didn't hold time. Behaved like time. In a bad fall, some moments stretched past their proper length, others simply absent. He remembered Crane going down. Not from a blow he could identify, from the suggestion of motion at the edge of the torchlight that existed and then didn't. And Crane was on the ground, making a sound that wasn't a word anymore. He remembered Seward's second attempt from 20 feet full draw. Clean line, a shot the man had made so many times, it lived closer to reflex than decision. The bolt flew true. It stepped through the bolt's path between the moment of release and the moment of arrival. No lurch, no dodge. A displacement of position so unhurried, it barely registered as movement until the pine behind Harwick took the shaft instead. Harwick's shadow was wrong. He noticed this with the detached absurdity of a mind operating at the wrong speed. His shadow fell toward the torchlight as it should. The other one's shadow, cast by the same torches, fell in no direction at all. Then the voice came. It spoke once low and unhurried after Seward's bolt buried itself in a pine 12 inches from Harwick's left ear. "You chose the terrain well. No anger, no raised pitch. The tone of someone taking inventory of a situation they had already resolved. None of it changes what I am." A beat not theatrical, simply the space between one thought and its conclusion. And now you know that. Bram was on the ground. Harwick could hear him still breathing fast and ragged, and then a sound registered that Harwick's mind refused to name Bram understanding. Not a cry. Not a plea. Just the sound of a man in the instant he realizes he has been selected. "I'm going to let 3 of you leave," the voice said. Conversational. "Not because I'm being merciful. Because 3 men who go home, knowing what happened here, are worth more to me than 6 who don't." "The large one with the fire oil," it said, "will not be among the 3. The breathing from the ground stopped trying to be steady. Then it stopped entirely. The torchlight caught the face for 1 full second, and what Harwick registered was not rage, not appetite. Something more specific. The bearing of a creature that had been handed permission to do something it was already going to do, and found the permission faintly redundant. Harwick ran. He said nothing, looked at nothing. Behind him, no footsteps. That absence followed him all the way to the gate. He came through the outer gate at the start of the 3rd watch. 2 others were ahead of him. He had overtaken. No one fallen behind. No one, they had simply collapsed out of the trees at different moments and moved in the same direction without choosing to. They came through the gate not as a group, but as 3 separate failures arriving at the same point. John was in the yard. He had his cloak on, and his jaw set the face of a man who has been waiting for exactly this and finds no satisfaction in being right. He looked at the 3 of them, at the state of them, the silence of them, the number of them, and did not speak for a long moment. "How many?" he said. Harwick tried to answer. His mouth worked twice before a sound came. "3 didn't come back," he said. John's eyes moved across them with the precision of someone checking for wounds understanding. His hands at his sides were very still. "Weapons?" he asked. Seward held up what remained of his crossbow, one arm of the prod. Splintered clean off, grabbed and folded. The way you fold green wood, not snapped, not torn. He held it with the face of a man examining evidence he had not been prepared to find. John took it from him. He turned it once in his hands. Then he set it down against the wall. A guard near the eastern stable had stopped moving. He was watching them from 30 feet away, with the stillness of someone who has understood what he's seeing, and decided not to be the first to name it. John's eyes found him. "Get inside," John said to the 3 returnees. "Don't speak to anyone." They went. The guard went back to his post. John stayed in the yard with the ruined crossbow at his feet, and nobody else came near. Sansa found him there when the eastern sky had gone from black to dark gray, and the castle was beginning its morning sounds. He was standing at the gate with the broken crossbow on the ground beside him, and he had the look of someone who had been holding a single thought for a long time, and was no longer certain whether holding it was helping. She stopped beside him. She did not ask what happened. She had understood the architecture of it from the moment Arya had appeared at her door 2 hours before, and said without prelude that the granary plan hadn't been the only plan. "How many didn't come back?" she asked. 3. Bram Castle and 2 others. She stayed with that. "I should have," John started. "No," she said. Not softly, directly. "You gave the order. The order was right. People made a different choice and paid for it." She kept her face toward the tree line. "This is not a failure of your command. This is what happens when people are more afraid of waiting than of dying wrong." John was quiet. "They'll be back," Sansa said. "The 3 who came back." "I know. And Aldrich will have to answer for what he knew." "I know. And no one in this castle, she said. "We'll try that again." It wasn't comfort. It wasn't forgiveness for anyone. It was simply the accounting laid out plainly because plainness was the only thing that helped now. John bent down and picked up the ruined crossbow. He held it the way you hold something returned to you, as a message: the splintered arm, the clean fold of the wood, which was not the tearing of combat, but the compression of something that had removed an inconvenience. "It let them live," he said. "The three who came back." "Yes." "That wasn't mercy." "No," Sansa said. "It wasn't." Neither of them said the name. There was no need. The name was in the crossbow and the folded wood in the three men inside the castle, who would answer questions in short sentences for the next several days and would flinch at the color red for considerably longer. They stood there in the gray morning, while Winterfell woke around them, fires being lit, gates being checked, the ordinary machinery of survival resuming. And the day that was beginning was quieter than any that had come before it. Not because things had resolved, because something had been demonstrated, and demonstrations of that order don't require repetition. The lesson had been delivered. All that remained was to decide what to do with it. They buried Bram Cassel before the morning was fully light. No ceremony. John had decided against it, not out of coldness, but out of understanding that ceremony required explanation. And the explanation of how Bram had died was not one that served any purpose to say in front of assembled men. A small group went out at first light to bring the bodies back. They returned with 2. The third, they reported, was not where it should have been. No one asked where it was. Aldrich attended the burial and said nothing, which was correct. He had been removed from command of the mounted archers the night before, replaced by a woman named Iris, who had no connection to the castle family, and who would follow orders precisely because she had no strong feelings about what had prompted them. Sansa had recommended her. John had agreed in 3 words and moved on to the next thing, because moving on to the next thing was at that moment the only act of governance available to either of them. Seward had not slept. Arya found him in the lower armory at the second morning bell, sitting on a bench with his hands on his knees and his eyes on the middle distance. He was not doing anything. He was not injured. He had been sitting there long enough that the torch near his head had burned a quarter of the way down. She sat across from him without announcing herself. He registered her presence and said nothing. She waited. She was good at waiting. After a while, he said, "It let me shoot first." Arya considered this. "How many times?" "3 before it moved. The bolts went in." His voice had the flat quality of someone recounting something their mind was still refusing to fully own. "They went into it. I saw them. And it..." He stopped, started again. "It took them out, set them down, like they were nothing it hadn't already accounted for." "Did it look at you?" The question landed differently than he expected. His eyes came off the middle distance for the first time and found her face. "Yes." "What did it look like when it did?" He was quiet for a long moment. The torch moved slightly in a draft from the door. "Interested," he said. "Not angry?" "Not, it wasn't threatening me. It was watching me the way you watch something you haven't decided what to do with yet." He looked down at his hands. "And then it decided." Arya nodded once slowly. She had what she needed. She stood. "You're a good shot, Shinem," she said. It wasn't comfort. It was a fact she was stating, so he understood that the failure was not the shot. The failure was the premise. He didn't answer. She left him to the dying torch. She found John in the north corridor, coming back from the wall inspection he did every morning, regardless of what the night had held. He had the crossbow's broken arm in his hand. Still, she had seen him carry it, the way other men carried a piece of bad news they hadn't yet decided where to put. "Seward won't sleep," she said. "I know." "Harwick either." She fell into step. The third one, the younger one, Wren, he talked. Told anyone who'd listen for about 2 hours, then stopped mid-sentence and hasn't said anything since. John absorbed this. Is he a danger to himself? No. He's a danger to the story staying manageable. She glanced at John. He told 3 of the kitchen staff before anyone thought to tell him not to. John closed his eyes for a moment, opened them. How much do they know? Enough. The bolt stopping in the air, the shadow being wrong. A beat. The bolts being set down. John said nothing for several steps. It wasn't random, Arya said. It let them try everything. All of it terrain, fire, dragon glass angle. It wanted them to run out of options while they were watching. She kept her voice even. That's not a thing that kills, because it has to. That's a thing that teaches. They walked without speaking until the corridor opened into the upper yard. The morning was gray and very cold, the sky low enough to feel pressing. I need to talk to Sansa, John said. She's been awake since before the burial. She knows you need to talk to her. Arya paused at the yard's edge. She's going to tell you the same thing she always tells you, but she's going to mean something different by it this time. John looked at her. And what are you going to tell me? Arya held the question for a beat. I'm going to tell you it's still out there. Not gone. Not satisfied. Still watching. She met his gaze with the directness that was its own form of discipline. Whatever it came here for, it isn't done. Not. Sansa was in the Great Hall, which had been cleared for a purpose Arya had not yet identified. The long tables were pushed back, a space opened in the center, and Sansa was moving through it with the focused efficiency of someone rearranging a problem into a shape she could grip. She was looking at the hall's north-facing wall when John came in. The garrison, she said without turning. We need to talk about the garrison. I know. She turned. She had the look she wore after a sleepless night, that she had chosen to spend working rather than attempting sleep. Not tired exactly, but compressed. Everything inessential removed. Aldrich's men are tracking each other. The free folk and the watch remnants are watching Aldrich's men. And everyone is oriented toward the north approach and flinching at red. She came to stand across the central space from him. I've been walking the hall for the last hour because I needed to understand how much of this is recoverable. Is it? The deaths are recoverable. 3 is a number the garrison can absorb. Her voice was careful and precise. The knowing is not recoverable. They have seen what they've seen, and they will not unsee it. She looked at him directly. I was right? Yes. About what would happen if it came close. About what fear does when it has no outlet that works. She held his gaze without satisfaction. Being right changes nothing about what we do next. John set the broken crossbow arm down on the nearest table. He looked at it for a moment, then left it there. I've been thinking about next. Tell me. No more single patrols on the North Road. 2-man minimum torches and a signal arrow. If they see it, they fire and come back. No engagement. He came forward toward the space between them. I'm not issuing orders about what to do if it enters the gate. She stilled. Why? Because issuing that order makes it a scenario we've planned for. Which means it becomes a scenario people are waiting for. He met her eyes. Right now, the most dangerous thing in this castle isn't what's outside the wall. It's the decision one of our own people makes the next time they see red at the tree line and have a loaded crossbow. Sansa absorbed that. Not disagreeing, weighing. You're managing fear instead of threat. I'm managing what I can manage. A pause honest and spare. The threat is beyond what management addresses. The framing was new. John had moved from searching for the correct response to Alucard to accepting that no response in his range applied. The shift was small and unstated. It was the most significant thing that had happened in 3 days. Sansa looked at the north wall. The gray morning light came through the upper windows and lay flat across the stone. "He'll still be there when the Night King arrives," she said. "Yes. And we have no way to know whose side he'll be on." "No." John picked up the broken crossbow arm again, set it back down. "I don't think he thinks in terms of sides. That might be worse." She turned from the wall. "Or it might be the only thing that saves us. I haven't been able to determine which." Neither had John. That uncertainty was the thing they had both been carrying since the garrison came back, with 3 people missing, and it had no resolution, and they were going to have to operate inside it regardless. "One more thing," Sansa said. "The 3 who came back, Harwick especially." She folded her hands. "They'll be asked, repeatedly, by people who weren't there and need to understand. I need to know they won't answer in a way that makes things worse. I'll talk to Harwick. Talk to Ren first. He's the one talking." Bran was in the glass garden again. John came to him just before midday after Ren had been spoken to, and Harwick had been given something more useful to do than sit with his thoughts. The glass garden was warmer than the yard, and Bran's chair faced south for once, which John found briefly strange enough to mention. "You're not looking north," John said. "I've seen enough of north," Bran said. John waited. "It's going to stay," Bran said. No preamble, no framing. Statement of observed fact. It was considering whether to before. It's decided now. Decided because of the attack. Bran was still in the way that meant the question was close, but not quite right. "Because of what the attack showed it," he said at last. "It's been watching to see if there's anything here worth watching, past the obvious." His eyes, still south-facing, held the settled distance they always carried now. "There is." John absorbed this. "The Night King. Among other things. A beat. When the dead arrive, it will be here. Not because we asked it. Not because it owes us anything." He paused once more, the way Bran always paused, when what followed mattered more than what came before. Because what's coming is the most interesting thing it's encountered in a very long time. And it intends to see it. John looked at the pale southern sky through the glass. Winterfell's world pressing down on everything. "Is that good for us?" he asked because Sansa had asked Bran something similar weeks ago, and he wanted to know if the answer had changed. "It means we're inside the thing it finds interesting," Bran said. "Whether that's good depends on what it decides to do about that interest." John left him facing south. At the second evening bell, the wall captain on the Eastern Watch sent word down. There was something at the base of the outer wall, not outside the gate. At the wall itself, the eastern face ground level in the narrow channel between the wall's foundation stones and the frozen earth. John went up. He looked down from the parapet at the channel below. The red was visible even at this angle. Not a shape, barely a presence, just the coat's color against the gray stone, close enough that an archer on the wall would have been shooting nearly straight down. Alucard was standing against Winterfell's outer wall. Not moving, not looking up, not doing anything that constituted a visible action. Just present at a distance from the gate, he could have covered in seconds close enough now that the wall above him was the only thing between him and the inner yard. John watched him for a while. He did not call for archers. He did not send a runner to Sansa. He stood on the parapet in the gray evening cold. and watched the still red shape below and understood that this was not an escalation in the way the ambush had been an escalation. It was not a test of what they'd do. It was the next thing after the test, the settling and the arriving. The quiet announcement of a new proximity that would not be walked back. After a time, he went down. Sansa was at the bottom of the wall stairs. "I know," she said. "He's not going to stop at the wall," Jon said. "No. But he's not forcing the gate." "No." She held his gaze. "He's establishing where he is." Jon thought about Bran's words, about what the attack had shown it, about interest as a form of intention that did not map to any category they had for intention. "We don't acknowledge it publicly," he said. "We don't change the guard rotation, don't alter any patrol timing, don't do anything that communicates. We saw it. And privately, and he said, we start thinking about what it means that when the dead arrive, this is where he'll be standing." Sansa looked at him for a long beat. Then she turned toward the hall, and her voice over her shoulder was as flat and final as any orders she'd given since this began. "Then we had better start thinking quickly." The dead arrived on the third day after the snows changed direction. Not north to south the way snow had always come. East now, a flat grinding wind off the coast of a sea that had no business sending weather this far inland, and the temperature dropped past the point where thermometers were useful and entered the territory of simple biological facts. Stay outside long enough and you stop. Jon had grown up knowing that kind of cold. He had never known it to arrive this fast. Tormund brought the word before dawn. The Outriders were gone. All three groups, all three approaches. Not dead, not found, which was worse. When scouts stopped returning, one of two things had happened. Either the terrain had taken them, or what they were scouting had. Nobody at the briefing argued about which. Jon stood at the northern parapet as the sky went from black to the particular iron gray that now passed for dawn, and looked at what he could see. Not much. The tree line, the road running north until it disappeared into the dark between the pines. The field of snow that had been empty every morning for weeks and was still empty now. Hobb, who commanded the wall's northern section, came up behind him. He was a compact, careful man, the kind who delivered bad news in the same voice he used for everything else. Because he had decided years back that all news was approximately the same. "Fires at Widow's Peak," he said. "Went out 2 hours ago. We had signal from them every night for the past 3 weeks." "I know," Jon said. "That's 40 miles north." "I know." Hobb said nothing more. He had delivered the information. The information spoke for itself. Jon stayed on the parapet until the gray deepened enough to see the full length of the northern field. He reviewed what they had. The inner gate was reinforced, oil reserves enough to light the main approach 3 times, over maybe 4 if rationing held. Every fighting person in Winterfell had been assigned a position. The free folk on the outer ring watch remnants on the walls. Stark garrison holding the keep approaches. Arya had asked for and received a position near the eastern gate, low and mobile. Sansa had refused a position in the inner hall, and instead taken command of the secondary supply lines, which put her everywhere she needed to be, without pinning her to one place. The plan had one gap in it that nobody had put into words. He looked north and slightly east to the place below the parapet, where the outer wall met the frozen ground, the narrow channel where a figure in a red coat had stood 3 days ago, with the ease of something that had chosen its proximity. There was no provision in any of his orders for what happened if Alucard moved toward the fighting. There was no position assigned, no signal protocol, no chain of command that ran through or around him. Every archer had been told, "Do not fire at a figure in red on the northern approach," which was the closest thing to a tactical acknowledgement John could manage without making it one. He had not spoken to Alucard since the morning after the ambush. He needed to do that now. He found him at the base of the eastern wall, simply present, standing in the channel between the wall's foundation and the frozen ground. No concealment, no surveillance posture, his coat the color of old blood in the pre-dawn gray, the hat casting its shadow across a face that was tilted slightly upward, not toward John on the parapet, but toward the sky. The pressing iron weight of a storm that had arrived from the wrong direction. John came down from the wall. He did not approach with his sword. He approached with the manner of someone who had run out of postures that were not a waste of time. Alucard turned when he was still 20 paces out. As always, not startled, only acknowledging an arrival he had already registered. "They're close," John said. "Yes." The amber gaze dropped from the sky. Something in it was different from every other time John had seen it, not brighter exactly, but oriented. The way a compass changes when north is found. Closer than your scouts could confirm. Your fires at Widow's Peak went out at midnight. The front has been moving since. John noted that he knew about Widow's Peak. He filed it. "I need to know where you'll be." Alucard regarded him with the expression of something that finds a question useful precisely because it has already decided the answer. "Where the Night King is." "That's not a position on my map." "No." A fractional tilt of the head. "Your map doesn't have a category for me. We've established that." "I need to know you won't be inside the gate when my people are trying to hold it." "I won't." He said it the way he said most true things, plainly, without weight, because the truth did not require ornamentation. "What's coming is outside. That's where I'll be." John held his gaze for a moment. The wind moved between them, carrying something that was not quite weather. Not the honest bite of snow. Not the clean freeze of open ground, but the temperature that precedes ice and does not intend warmth after. "The White Walkers," John said. "The Night King." "Yes. You've been waiting for them." The amber eyes held something that was as close to honest as John had ever seen them. Not warmth, not alliance, but a kind of transparent acknowledgement that did not trouble itself to be anything other than what it was. "I've been waiting," Alucard said, "for something that requires my complete attention. That hasn't happened in a considerable interval." He looked north, and the quality of that attention was different from any look John had seen a man give a battlefield. It was the attention of something hungry, in the precise structural way that a thing is hungry when patience has run its full course. Tonight or tomorrow. Soon. John absorbed this. He thought about what Arya had said in the upper yard, a thing that teaches. He thought about the broken crossbow arm. He thought about 3 men who flinched at red. He did not ask Alucard to protect anyone. He did not ask him to hold a line or reinforce a position or coordinate with any human being in Winterfell. He had learned enough in the weeks since the garrison to know that asking would get him something that looked like an answer and wasn't. "The Night King," John said, "if you engage him." "When?" John registered that. "When? Your priority will be him." Alucard looked at him for a long moment with something that, in another face, might have been called consideration. "My priority," he said carefully, "will be whatever is most interesting. The Night King is currently at the top of that list." A beat minimal. "He has been informed of my presence. He is not pleased." That is itself interesting. John thought, how does it know the Night King is aware of it? John did not ask because the answer would not help him deploy anyone. "Then I'll work around you," he said. Alucard's chin dipped once, not quite a nod, an acknowledgement that this was the correct approach. "Lord Snow." He turned back toward the north. When your people see me moving tonight, tell them not to interfere, not for my sake." A pause that had no performance in it, just the gap before the last relevant piece. For theirs. John went back up the wall. He found Sansa on the upper walkway of the keep, looking at the garrison below. The preparations were complete, every barrel of oil in place. Every archer with a full quiver, every gate tested twice. The courtyard had the specific ordered stillness of a place where everything has been done that can be done, and what remains is the waiting. "He'll be outside the wall," John said. Sansa did not ask which he. Engaged with the dead or with us? With whatever reaches the Night King. She took this in. Her face did not change in the way relief would change it or dread would change it. It shifted in a narrower way, the expression of someone revising a calculation that affects several other calculations downstream. "Then we treat the northern approach as occupied by two forces we can't direct." "Yes." "And our lines hold the inner perimeter." "Yes." She was quiet for a moment, watching a group of archers below settling into position. The men who've been tracking his movements. The ones who can't stop looking for red at the tree line. Her voice was even. "Tonight they're going to see him outside the gate in the middle of a battle. I need them not to break. I've spoken to Hob. He knows who to watch." "It's not enough." She turned from the yard. "Tell me something true, John." He looked at the northern sky, the iron gray pressing down on everything. "I don't know what happens when those two forces engage each other. That's honest. I don't know which one scares me more right now." She said nothing. The courtyard below went on with its work. Neither of them said what they both understood, that the answer to that question would make itself apparent soon, and that the making apparent was the thing they could not prepare for and could not avoid. Tained. Arya was on the eastern wall when the horn sounded. One long note. Clean. The sound the watch used for confirmed contact, not suspected, not ambiguous, confirmed the dead were on the approach. She looked north. The tree line was moving. Not the trees, the shadows below them, a mass of motion at a depth that resolved as she watched into shapes. Individual shapes, then too many to count, then a density that stopped being individual entirely and became something else. A tide, the specific darkness of a thing that used to be many things and is now one. And in front of it, well ahead of the line, separated from the mass by 200 yards of empty field, a point of red. Standing, facing what was coming. She watched him for 3 full seconds. He had not moved. The army was advancing, and he was standing in the field between them and Winterfell with the ease of something that is exactly where it intended to be. And there was nothing in his bearing that registered the scale of what was behind him as a threat. He registered it the way you register weather, as a condition, as a context, as the thing that makes the next several hours interesting. She heard herself say very quietly to no one, "There it is." Fear would have sounded different. Relief, too. What was in her voice was recognition, the same tone she used when she found the answer to a question she'd been working on for a long time. Below and behind her, Winterfell's horns answered the watch. The full alarm, every gate closing, every fighter moving, every torch lit. The great grinding sound of a castle becoming what it was built to be. Alucard did not move toward the wall. He moved toward the advancing line. He walked out across the field in the direction of the advancing line, unhurried in the specific way that removed any possibility of misreading this, was not someone running to safety, not someone retreating, not someone uncertain of direction. He walked with the ease of a man going to meet something he had been saving for a considerable interval. The dead came on. The red coat disappeared into the distance. Not into darkness, just into the scale of it, because the field was very large, and the army was very many. And for a long moment, the only thing visible was the mass and the dark and the horns and the torches on the wall, and the sound of 10,000 people getting ready to find out what they were made of. Then far out in the dark, something happened. It had no name. It was not lightning, not fire, not any illumination produced by burning. It was the kind of light that exists at the edge of comprehension. Not bright enough to see by, bright enough to know that something had begun that would not end quietly. On the wall above the gate, Hob lowered the signal torch he had been holding and turned to the man beside him. "Gods," the man said. Hob looked north for one long moment. Then he turned to face his archers, and his voice, when it came, was exactly what it always was. The voice of a man who delivers all news the same way because the alternative is not useful. "Positions fixation," he said, eyes on the wall.
If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel, and be sure to turn on notification so you won't miss our future video. Thank you for watching, and we will see you next time.